In a sterile courtroom, the world's most powerful CEO sat in silence, his wrists bound in steel, his $1,000 suit crumpled like discarded paper. The press flashed outside the frosted windows. His face, once revered on the cover of Time, now looked like that of a man who had lost everything, except one haunting regret. A child, no older than 10, stood across the room. Her eyes didn't flinch, didn't blink. No tears. Just a stare that pierced through empire and ego alike. The judge spoke, the crowd murmured, but the CEO heard nothing, only the echo of her voice from months ago. You can't buy people, even if you own everything else. His chest tightened. No words came. For the first time in decades, he was powerless. And the child turned and walked away. Not in anger, but in finality. In that moment, the man who conquered markets realized he'd never earned the one thing that mattered. He once thought nothing in the world could stop him. Not markets. Not governments. Not even mortality. Power was his compass, his armor, and his addiction. Yet here he sat, not in the penthouse but a courtroom, not behind bulletproof glass, but behind bars. He didn't look up when the cameras left. He didn't answer the lawyer's whispers. His mind wasn't in the room. It was with her, the little girl who didn't flinch. The one whose silence screamed louder than any verdict. That child was the only person who'd ever looked at him without fear or awe. She'd looked at him like a man, and he didn't know how to be one. Outside, the world spun with opinions. Investors pulled out, networks speculated, hashtags burned like wildfire. But inside, there was only the aftershock. The silence of a toppled titan. As the bailiff motioned for the next case, no one looked back at the CEO. For them, the scene was over. But for him, this was the first time he felt the weight of the role he'd played. Not as a businessman, but as a father. And not just a father who failed, but one who'd never tried to understand what mattered to her. He remembered her first steps, not in his arms, but on a blurry video sent by an assistant. Her birthday parties were always attended by a gift courier and a corporate card. She had his name. She didn't have him. And when she spoke to him last, she wasn't begging. She wasn't even angry. Just done. That made it worse. If she'd screamed, he could have fought back. If she cried, he could have fixed it. But she just walked away. The deal he couldn't close. The investor he couldn't win. The daughter he didn't deserve. The fall didn't come from scandal or strategy. It came from silence. A little girl's silence. One that echoed louder than boardroom applause or quarterly reports. And in that silence, he finally heard himself. Not the speeches. Not the sound bites. Just the truth. He had everything, except what he couldn't buy. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to try to earn it. Before the boardrooms, before the suits, before the press called him a genius, he was just a boy sitting on a cold kitchen floor, learning how to disappear. His name was Michael, but no one said it kindly. The electricity had been off for 3 days. The fridge hummed in protest, before dying altogether. His schoolbooks lay beside him unopened, stained with last week's ramen. From the bathroom, his mother's muffled sobs cracked through the silence like thunder. She thought he couldn't hear, but he always did. He counted her cries the way others counted sheep. Outside, sirens passed by like ghosts. Inside, the smell of burnt toast clung to the wallpaper. And in that fragile moment, Michael made a promise to himself. Not out of hope, but fury. One day, I will never be this helpless again. Not for her. Not for anyone. The boy disappeared that night. The man began to take his place. His mother was made of steel wrapped in smiles. Every morning she layered makeup over bruised pride and tied her hair tight like armor. She wore the same waitress uniform for 6 years. Yellowed collar, pocket full of coins, soul-taped shoes she glued together in the dark. At night she'd say, "We're rich in love," with a cracked lip grin. Michael never believed it. Love didn't pay bills. Love didn't keep lights on. He watched her beg grocers for expired bread, watched her nod silently when the landlord forgot to fix the heat again. Shame wasn't taught to him. It was witnessed, memorized, seared into him. He learned early that the world bowed only to power, and his mother had none. So he swore he'd get enough for both of them, no matter what it cost. Even if it meant leaving the version of himself she had loved behind. By 14, Michael had more cash than his teachers. Candy bars turned to bootleg electronics. Electronics turned into online reselling. By 20, he dropped out of college, not out of failure, but efficiency. His professors couldn't teach him what he already knew. Fear is the most valuable currency. He built fast, sharp, clean down. Everything his childhood wasn't. He made millions while pretending he didn't hear his mother's messages. Call me back, baby. Just 1 minute. He never did. There was always a deal. A meeting. A war to win. And when the call came from the hospital, when the nurse said, "She asked for you," he was in Tokyo, signing a merger. He didn't cancel. Didn't even pause. She passed at 3:17 a.m., alone. And for the first time Michael didn't feel like a king. He felt like a fraud. But he wouldn't show it. He'd forgotten how. The funeral took 15 minutes. 4 people showed. No music. No memories. Just a gray casket, wet soil, and a sky that didn't care. Michael arrived late, coat soaked in rain, sunglasses hiding the storm he wouldn't admit. He stood apart from the others, hands in pockets, shoulders stiff. His phone buzzed. A $1 billion acquisition. He didn't pick up. Couldn't. For the first time in his life, there was no spin, no strategy, just silence. A silence so loud it pressed against his lungs. He whispered, "I made it, Mom," and instantly hated how hollow it sounded. Success meant nothing here. There were no headlines in the mud. Only the echo of a woman who gave everything, and the son who gave her nothing but distance. He stayed after everyone left. Stood there until the rain stopped pretending to clean him. Michael never visited the grave again. Grief, to him, was weakness. And weakness got exploited. So he buried it, like everything else. He built a fortress out of spreadsheets and cold calls. He told himself she'd be proud. That this empire was her legacy too. But the truth? He was still running. Still that little boy, watching the bathroom door, waiting for life to get better. Then, years later, it happened. The elevator opened. She was standing there. A girl no older than 10. Brown skin. Sharp eyes. Curly hair pulled back tight. She didn't smile. Didn't flinch. She just stared up at him. Same eyes. Same silence. He knew. He knew in a way that made his stomach drop. She didn't know who he was. Not really. But she expected something from him. Something real. What is Al? Shao. And for the first time since that night on the kitchen floor, Michael didn't know what to do next. Michael didn't ask questions. Not about the girl. Not about where she came from or what she needed. He just did what he always did. He moved. A private school was enrolled within a week. A trust fund established. A townhouse purchased. Every problem had a price. Every feeling was a task to be automated, delegated, or secured. But what he didn't expect was the sound. Her laughter in the kitchen. Her footsteps echoing through marble floors. It wasn't affection. It wasn't even comfort. It was disruption. His world was built on silence, and she broke it just by being. He'd built this life to insulate himself from pain, but now, pain had curly hair and asked him awkward questions at breakfast. "Why don't you ever smile, Michael?" she said one morning. Not Dad. Not Father. Just his name. And that hurt more than he admitted. The company was expanding faster than ever. New verticals, aggressive takeovers, global dominance. Michael was a machine again, a master of scale. But something inside was shifting. He started skipping dinners. Not because he forgot, but because he didn't want to disappoint her with his silence. He'd never learned how to talk to children. He only knew how to build. So he built her a home, a wardrobe, a security detail. But connection? That couldn't be wired in. Late one night, he watched her sleep through the crack in her door. Her stuffed animals were placed in a circle like a meeting. One had a post-it that read, CEO Bear. Michael smiled, but it ached. She was building her world from the pieces she saw in his. And that scared him more than any market crash ever could. At the office, he was still a god. Glass towers. Hushed elevators. Teams that moved when he breathed. He walked into meetings where silence fell like dominoes. But lately, he noticed things differently. His assistant's tired eyes, a junior analyst's trembling hands. He remembered his mother's shoes. He remembered her pain behind the smile. Had he become the thing he swore to destroy? In a performance review, a young woman struggled through feedback. He interrupted. What do you need to thrive? She froze. So did the room. No one expected empathy from him. Not even him. That night, he drove home in silence, unblinking. Empires were easy. Empathy was foreign. But maybe necessary. He started saying no. No to more. No to expansion. No to billion-dollar partnerships that didn't feel right. The board was furious. The press called him unpredictable. But Michael had stopped performing for applause. He began showing up for school recitals, sitting in the back, clapping too loudly. He even missed a quarterly review to take her to a dentist appointment. It was awkward. She giggled when he tried to braid her hair. And he hated how hard it was. But he kept trying. Because for the first time, the work wasn't about domination. It was about redemption. And the cost? Time. Ego. A few angry shareholders. But compared to what he'd lost, it was worth every moment. But nothing good came without sacrifice. Investors began to circle. His coup threatened resignation. Journalists whispered about the CEO who had gone soft. He smiled through it. The empire was no longer his identity. It was his instrument. And the child now calling him Dad in quiet moments had become his compass. She once asked, "Why do people say you're scary?" He didn't answer. He just took her hand and said, "Because I used to be." The price was rising. Power, reputation, control. But so was he. For the first time, Michael wasn't rising to escape something. He was rising to meet someone. And this time, he would not miss the moment. It started with a phone call. One Michael didn't answer. His assistant left a message. "There's something strange in the Q4 audit. You should see it yourself." But Michael was at a parent-teacher conference, listening to how his daughter excelled at leadership but struggled with trust. He smiled politely, not hearing a word. The next morning, the boardroom was silent. Two men in suits from the Justice Department waited in the corner, folders in hand. Michael entered, eyes scanning the table. "What's this?" he asked, voice calm but cold. No one spoke. The folder opened. Inside, emails. Financial reports. Redacted transactions. Signatures. His sequence. Only, he never signed them. Not really. His coup had. His best friend. His right hand. For 5 years, he'd rerouted company funds into offshore accounts using Michael's authority. "You didn't know," one agent said. "But you're still liable." And just like that, the floor gave way. Michael barely heard the words. Embezzlement, collusion, negligence. He stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. His name appeared again and again. Below, each forged signature was a whisper of betrayal. And across from him sat the coup, calm, composed, not even denying it. "You were too busy saving your soul," he said. "So I saved the company." Michael wanted to scream. to flip the table, to rewind time. But all he did was ask, why? The answer came like a scalpel. Because you let it rot, you left it behind. For her. Her. Aisudan. Ashawani. The child. His daughter. His reason. His weakness. And in that moment, Michael realized the real cost of building something sacred, leaving your back exposed. His silence cracked into a whisper. Get out. But the damage was already done. News broke within hours. Empire built on fraud? CEO, under investigation. Company crumbling. Headlines multiplied like locusts. Stock prices bled. Journalists camped outside his building like vultures. The girl, his daughter, watched it all on a school iPad. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just looked at him when he picked her up that day and said, "Did you lie to everyone?" The question pierced deeper than any indictment. Michael knelt down beside her, in the middle of the school hallway, tie undone, hair uncombed. "No," he said, "but I stopped watching. And that's just as bad." She nodded once, took his hand, and walked with him through a crowd of whispering parents. No bodyguards. No entourage. Just a father and a girl trying not to drown in each other's silence. That night, Michael stared at his skyline, his empire, blinking under red warning lights. The building that bore his name now carried scandal. He opened his laptop, hundreds of emails screaming for answers. Investors. Legal teams. His own lawyers urging him to step aside, temporarily. He clicked on a folder labeled, Family. It had 4 photos. That was it. 4 moments in a lifetime of absence. He closed the lid, walked down the hall, opened her bedroom door. "Can I tell you a story?" he asked. She was drawing quietly. "Only if it's true," she said without looking up. He smiled faintly, sat beside her on the rug. "Then this one might hurt." And for the first time, Michael told the story of the boy who promised never to be poor, and lost everything that made him rich. The next morning, he announced it. "Effective immediately, I will step down as CEO." Cameras clicked. Reporters surged. His face was everywhere, but for the first time, the man in the footage didn't feel like an image. He felt human. The board was stunned. Shareholders, furious. The markets panicked. But Michael didn't care. He stood at the podium not as a titan, but as a father. "I once built a company to never feel powerless again," he said. "But real power is being able to walk away from it." When he finished, there was no applause. Just silence. Honest, brutal silence. And in that silence, he smiled. It wasn't relief. It wasn't pride. It was freedom. Not the kind money buys. The kind you earn. The board gave him a choice. Walk away quietly, or fight, and lose everything. "You'll never get back in if you leave," one director warned. "They'll devour you." Michael looked out the window at the empire he once ruled. The skyline glittered like armor. But it wasn't his armor anymore. It was a cage. Behind him the board waited, papers ready, eyes cold. In his hand was a resignation letter. In his mind, 1,000 counter-moves. But none of them felt real. The only voice he heard was hers. "Why do people say you're scary?" He smiled faintly. Maybe because they didn't know he was scared too. He set the letter down, pushed it forward, and said, "Let them devour me." He stood. Straight. Calm. Nitty. Finally, free. He didn't look back as the boardroom erupted behind him. He walked out of that building without security, without an escort, without fanfare. Just him and the sound of his own breath. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. He didn't speak. Didn't gesture. Just kept walking. But halfway to the car he stopped. Not because someone called his name, but because he realized he didn't know where he was going. For the first time in decades there was no meeting, no schedule, no plan. He was unprotected. undefined. And instead of fear, he felt something worse, stillness. Until a tiny hand slipped into his. She had waited for him outside the chaos. No limo. No driver. Just a girl with a backpack and an oversized jacket. "Are we going home?" she asked. He looked down at her and said, without hesitation, "Ice." Finally. That evening, the townhouse was quieter than usual. No emails. No emergency calls. Just the clink of silverware against ceramic, the gentle hum of a playlist she'd chosen. Michael sat across from her, watching her dip her chicken into ketchup with theatrical precision. "Is this what normal is?" he asked. She grinned. "No, this is ours." The air didn't buzz with tension. The lighting didn't scream opulence. It was simple. And it was enough. He poured 2 glasses of orange juice and raised one in a mock toast. "To the first night of the rest of our lives," he said. She laughed. "You sound like a commercial." He smiled wider than he had in years. The empire he lost was nothing compared to the life he was finally starting to build. Later that night, after she fell asleep, Michael sat alone in the living room, knees drawn up, a blanket over his shoulders. The television played a documentary on silence, how monks trained to hear the world inside themselves. He muted it. Outside, the city pulsed like a memory. He thought of his mother, of the apartment, of the promise he made. "I will never be powerless." And now, stripped of everything, he'd never felt more powerful. He picked up a crayon drawing from the coffee table, 2 stick figures holding hands in front of a crooked house. At the top, in blocky letters, "Me and Dad's Real Company." He smiled. No trademarks. No valuation. No logo. Just truth. And that was enough. In the middle of the night, she woke from a dream and found him in the hallway, staring at an old family photo he'd hung that day, his mother holding him as a boy, both smiling through exhaustion. She reached for his hand. Was she nice? He looked down, eyes stinging. "She gave me everything." The girl didn't say anything. She just held on. And in that moment, with no boardroom, no speech, no wealth, Michael realized what legacy really meant. Not ownership. Not control. But connection. He wasn't rebuilding an empire. He was replanting a name. A father. A son. A daughter. A home. Not a kingdom. Just a place where love didn't have to be earned. Where it could simply be given. Freely. Finally. The world moved on without him. New CEOs replaced him. His name faded from headlines, except in footnotes. Once his inbox was a flood. Now it was a trickle. Invitations to speak. Offers to sell his story. But he declined them all. He wasn't interested in telling a story. He was busy living one. Every morning he made breakfast, not because he knew how, but because she liked when the pancakes were burnt on the edges. Every evening he helped with homework, confused but present. They laughed more than they talked. And somehow, that was enough. The empire he gave up didn't haunt him. What haunted him was how long he believed it mattered. Now, the moments he once dismissed, walks to school, silly dances, bedtime stories, became his milestones. Not apoesta, not acquisitions, but giggles and grace. Once he walked stages to applause. Now he walked school hallways to paper crafts taped on walls. He didn't miss the suits, the speeches, the noise. He was learning the music of small moments. Field trips, dentist appointments, iduizeri and parent-teacher nights where he was just another nervous adult. Some recognized him, whispers of, "Isn't that?" But most didn't. And that was the gift. To exist without performance. To be seen not as a brand but as a man trying. Flawed, fumbling, and fully there. He once feared becoming invisible. Now, he craved it. The quiet allowed space for something bigger than status, presence. Not power over others, but power within himself. It didn't come from headlines. It came from being the person she could count on, even if the rest of the world never would again. He started mentoring again, not executives, but teenagers. Kids from neighborhoods like the one he came from. He taught them about contracts, taxes, credit, and mistakes. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't preach. He just showed up. And sometimes, that was more than enough. One kid asked, "Were you really that guy on the cover of Time?" Michael smiled, shrugged. "For a while." The boy nodded. "You don't seem like him." "Good," Michael said. He didn't know what he was doing. In that old community center, surrounded by plastic chairs and whiteboards, Michael found something he never had in a corner office: peace. Not because he had all the answers, but because he'd finally learned how to ask the right questions. One evening, while tucking her in, she asked, "Are we poor now?" The question hit harder than any headline. Michael hesitated. "No," he said. "We just have less money. But we're richer, right?" she asked, her eyes wide with belief. He nodded, his throat tightening. "Yeah, we are." She smiled and rolled over, as if the world was settled. And maybe it was. He sat by her bedside a while longer, watching her drift to sleep. No wealth he ever earned could match that moment. Not a private jet. Not a penthouse. Not applause. Just the quiet rise and fall of her breath, and the realization that everything he thought made him powerful was nothing compared to the strength it took to start again, differently. Honestly. They visited her grandmother's grave that spring. For the first time she knelt beside the stone and placed a drawing: 2 women, 1 little girl, and a man with silver in his hair. "This is us," she said. "I told her about you." Michael said nothing, just placed a single daffodil on the stone. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was sacred. He had built companies, negotiated with kings, stood atop towers. But nothing felt as monumental as that moment, being seen not for what he'd done, but for who he was becoming. As they walked away, she looked up at him and said, "Do you think she's proud?" He answered without hesitation. "I think she'd say, 'You saved me.'" And for once, he knew the answer was true. Seasons passed. Life unfolded in small, honest chapters. Michael no longer counted quarterly projections, but school days and sunrises. He didn't know when exactly it changed, but he no longer felt the itch to prove himself. Not to the world. Not even to his past. He found comfort in repetition, packing lunches, school drop-offs, bedtime books read too slowly. He was building something again, but this time, brick by brick, not dollar by dollar. He no longer lived for applause, but for laughter through thin walls. And in that quiet life, stripped of spectacle, he found something that had eluded him through empires and headlines: contentment. Not the loud, intoxicating kind. The kind you whisper to yourself before falling asleep, knowing for once you didn't miss the moment. One afternoon, they visited a downtown plaza where a new startup incubator had opened. On the building's wall, a mural towered 3 stories tall. An abstract timeline of tech founders, disruptors, and visionaries. At the bottom, half faded but still visible, was a younger version of Michael, smiling in a power pose, hand in pocket, gazing into the future. His daughter stared at it for a long time. "Is that really you?" she asked. He looked at it for a moment, then shook his head gently. "That was someone trying very hard to be me." She didn't respond. Just reached into her bag and pulled out a marker. "Should I draw your real face?" He laughed. "You already have." And together, they walked past the mural, leaving legacy behind for something realer, something still being written. The world forgot him. And that was okay. No statues. No headlines. No grand farewell tour. What he got instead was something better. A seat in the audience at her first debate tournament. A front row ticket to her awkward middle school play. He cheered too loud. filmed too much, laughed too long. But she never told him to stop. Not once. And one night, while organizing storage boxes, she found a dusty award with his name engraved. Entrepreneur of the Year. She held it up like it was an ancient relic. Did this mean a lot? He looked at it for a long beat. It did, he said. Then gently took it and placed it back in the box. But not anymore. And with that, they taped the box shut. Together. At sunrise he stood alone on a cliffside trail overlooking the ocean. No suit. No agenda. Just air, sky, and the kind of silence that doesn't ache. The same silence that once crushed him, now felt like peace. He closed his eyes, arms gently out, letting the breeze cut across his face. The waves below thundered like applause, but not the kind he chased. The kind the earth gives you when you finally stop shouting back. For years he thought redemption would look like a stage, a speech, a comeback. But it didn't. It looked like this, quiet, grounded, honest. He whispered her name. His daughter. The only legacy he now cared to leave behind. Not his company. Not his wealth. Just her. And maybe that was enough. Back home, the living room buzzed with quiet celebration. She was accepted into her dream school. Scholarships. Letters. Joy. Joy. She danced barefoot across the hardwood floor, holding the acceptance letter like a trophy. Michael stood in the doorway watching. Not interfering. Just present. When she noticed him, she ran over, wrapped her arms around his waist and whispered, "You did it." He shook his head, voice soft, eyes glassy. "No," he said. "You did. I just made it in time to watch." The music played on. Fireworks echoed in the distance. And as she returned to her dance, Michael walked over to the mirror and saw his reflection. Not the CEO, not the story, not the myth. Just a man. A father. And he smiled. Finally.